Law Parish Church, where grace happens.
So everyday life as we've known it has been significantly challenged by the pandemic. Who we can see, where we can go, what will become of us, none of that can be taken for granted right now. The virus has shaken our political, economic and social world in a way that's left many of us feeling anxious, angry, confused, anguished. Where can we find help to balance us on this shaking ground? Well, for thousands of years, the book of Exodus has retold the story of a nameless people who, oppressed by what they couldn't change, find the God that they had forgotten or never actually knew shows up among them as a compassionate, liberating, powerful presence who leads them into an unimagined freedom. This story is still a resource to help us see things differently, to help engage our imagination in new possibility. So from now up until Advent, we're going to allow this story not just to be a story. We're going to allow this story to become our story.
Immeasurable might, whose hand shaped the sun in the sky, on solid foundations established creation and gave it life. Everything made by design, crafted with wisdom divine, painted with purpose on your living canvas, making the world come alive. Praise the Lord, my soul, God, you are wonderful. All of creation breathes because of you. You have poured your heart into this work of art, and with breath you gave the world responds in praise. Thank you for all you have made. You are the giver of life, sustainer of all in your sight. You care for the needs of the creatures beneath your watchful eye. You're our creator and king. Your goodness surrounds everything, ruling with kindness and walking beside us, reigning in majesty. Praise the Lord, my soul, God, you are wonderful. All of creation praise because of you. You have poured your heart into this work of art, and with breath you gave the world responds in praise.
This morning has welcomed us from our sleep, or our struggle to sleep, offering a day in which to find ourselves blessed with life again. We have lived a week behind us with its mundane have-to-dos, the things we never got a chance to do, the things we wish were different, the people we met and those we didn't get a chance to meet, the things that hurt and the things that gave us hope. Some of us have reason to say thank you, some of us have need to say sorry. Some of us have found faith again, and some of us have struggled with questions that never get past asking why. But without drama or fanfare, in the midst of our powerlessness, you are secretly present, like the air we forget we're breathing that is the source of our lives. Your presence is faithful to who we are, challenging the settled for when we are made to be more, hammering our self-hate with understanding mercy, forgiving the sins we've mindlessly chosen, giving us enough to get through a day until we can know again that life is a gift and a blessing worth living.
Israel starts out as nothing more than an old man's dream and an old woman's wished for child. A dream and a wish that waits and wanders in the dark by the candlelight of a promise given them by God, how even past their sell-by date a son would be given them. And over the years, Abram and Sarah laugh and panic and doubt this promise until, remarkably, a single seed called Isaac grows between them. And from Isaac, 2 more shoots arrive, Jacob and Esau, the wrestling twins. And from Jacob, 12 more sons branch out and bring down to Egypt 70 of their family, where their brother Joseph has made it big. Year after year, generation succeeds generation of Abram and Sarah's children, until they've grown into a large migrant population living in Egypt. Was all of this just a good roll of the dice? You might be tempted to think so from what we read, because in the first 7 verses of Exodus, as Israel's people swell in number, there's no mention of God at all. But the writers of Exodus know just a few pages back, God gives a promise to Abraham. Look, God says, look towards the heavens and count the stars if you're able to. So shall your descendants be. And Abraham gazed up at the night sky to stars more numerous than the grains of sand under his feet. This fruitful and prolific growth, this multiplying and growing exceedingly strong so that the land was filled by them, is that promise coming true? And between the lines of the first 7 verses describing Israel's growth, God is quietly at work, keeping his promise. Much of the time, isn't that how we experience God? Not there in your face, but at work between the lines of our story. So much so, sometimes we fail or forget to notice he's there. When all the while God is working within chance and circumstance of our daily living, working through the people we love or try to avoid, working to mend our brokenness, find us in our waywardness, forgive our sin, give us courage for the tight places that we struggle to get by in. I wonder, have you caught a glimpse of God at work in your story lately? Heard the echo of his footstep? A feather of his presence left behind? So in these first verses of Exodus, the promise given to Abraham seems to be unstoppable until the people in Egypt start to get edgy about the migrant population, start to think, maybe we should build a wall or make sure that they can't cross the channel to reach here. And in the space of just 2 verses, great suspicion, fear, greed, and ethnic prejudice will turn the migrant community into economic slaves. The promise of God given to Abraham, the promise given to us in Jesus, won't happen in an easy straight line. Won't happen without hardship, without opposition, without God's coming onto the page of our story and revealing himself as the promise maker who sets the captives free. One of the things I find interesting about this story is when it comes to be written down in its final form. Exodus is written down when the people of promise are back in captivity again, living as exiles in Babylon. It's under the new Pharaoh, Nebuchadnezzar, in the new Egypt, Babylon, that Israel remembers again the story of being set free. Isn't that partly what makes this story so powerful? It understands how there is always some new Pharaoh, willing to challenge the life-giving promise of God, willing to use greed and anxiety ethnic tension, economic advantage to control and manipulate the lives of others. But Exodus invites us to trust how there's more going on behind the scenes and headlines of history, more happening beneath the attention of the powerful that doesn't finally close off our future. Retelling Exodus while they are imprisoned in Babylon, Israel tries to see beyond the loss of Jerusalem and destruction of the temple. See behind the enslavement under new captors. How even when God seems absent from the page, he's active and working to make her into the numberless stars Abraham once saw in the night and couldn't count. Working for their freedom. How bold is that, to rewrite a story of freedom when you're powerless to make yourself free? Calling to mind the faithfulness of God that's never broken by whichever new Pharaoh is on the block. I think one of the reasons why it's helpful to return to this story, perhaps especially just now, is to remind ourselves of how God is working between the lines of our story. Working in the way that the novelist Fred Buechner writes. We have survived, you and I, after 20 years, 40 years, 60 years or 80. We have made it to this year and this day. We needn't have made it. There were times we thought we wouldn't and nearly didn't. And what does that surviving tell us? It tells us, weak as we are, a strength beyond our strength has pulled us through at least this far, at least to this day. It tells us, foolish as we are, wisdom beyond our wisdom has flickered up just enough to light, if not to the right path, at least to a path that leads forward. It tells us, as faint as we are, a love beyond our power to love has kept our hearts alive. It tells us, though most of the time we have failed to see it, we were never really alone. As the story of Exodus begins, written down by those in captivity, it invites us to remember how, even when absent from the page, it is the good Father of Jesus who has been with us, as Buechner says. Through all our days and years, whether we know it or not, in our best moments and our worst, to heal us with his wonders, to wound us healingly with his judgments, to bless us in hidden ways, though more often than not we had forgotten his name. And today maybe it's enough to be mindful how whatever Pharaoh is over us in these days, loss, grief, anger, frustration, whatever piles up sore and unanswered questions, it's between these lines of our story God is at work, and the power of his Son to set us free. Exodus is the old story that is always happening. Amen.
God, you are the promise of mending where the world is broken. You are the promise of peace where the world opts for strife. We remember those who are powerless to find food for their children or keep them safe from falling bombs. We remember those with so little life under the rule of Pharaoh that they risked their lives on flimsy boats to try and find a new freedom. Lord, in your mercy, hear our prayer. God, you are the tender presence of love that works between the lines of our story. We remember those who feel unable to cope, those who are oppressed by depression, those who are caught on the wire of whatever they can't change, those who can only get by with the help of a food bank. Lord, in your mercy, hear our prayer. We remember those powerless to prevent what age is doing to their bodies, those for whom illness is the sore world that they find themselves daily walking through, those who have little left of themselves to share with the hunger and hurt of others. Lord, in your mercy, hear our prayer. We remember the church, a people who carry the promise of your blessing, a people who carry the presence of your Spirit, a people whose own lives are buffeted and bumped by all we are powerless to change, and yet a people who know you are present as blesser, forgiver, healer, between the lines of our story, as we live in the promise of your Son, who died and rose again, that all might be blessed with the mercy and forgiveness of heaven. Lord, in your mercy, hear our prayer.